you.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a real pleasure to follow my honourable friend who's made such a powerful and passionate case and so rightly pointed out the false economy that inequality represents. Mr. Deputy Speaker, thousands of families in my Aberavon constituency, like families across the UK, have taken a real buffeting over the last 18 months. And this month could bring the perfect storm for those families. As the furlough scheme ends, the universal credit uplift is scrapped and the cost of living spirals upwards. The pandemic has had a significant impact on household finances, which have been stretched to breaking point. And not everybody is able to weather the storm as easily as others. Members on the benches opposite like to claim that their government has fixed the roof while the sun is shining. But the reality is that the Tory roof is made of straw and a cold wind is blowing. Worrying research from the Bevan Foundation has found that 1 in 3 Welsh households does not have enough money to buy anything beyond everyday items, while more than 1 in 5 households with a net income of less than £20,000 have seen their income drop since January. The planned cut to universal credit will only deepen these inequalities, as those on the lowest incomes will be pushed into poverty and destitution. In Aberavon alone, over 7,000 households receive universal credit, and for those families, the £20 a week uplift has been a lifeline, protecting those who have lost income and preventing them from slipping into poverty or from having to visit the food bank to feed their families. It's also important to note that of the 7,000 families in Aberavon that I mentioned, 7,000 households who are on universal credit, 2,000 of those registered since the start of the pandemic. So this idea that the removal of the uplift is somehow not a cut is deeply disingenuous, because those 2,000 who registered since the start of the pandemic, they certainly haven't known any other universal credit than the one that they've received since registering. So it is a blatant and deeply disingenuous claim that the government is making. The uplift has also made a real difference to family budgets. My inbox has been filled with emails from residents telling me how it has helped them to meet the cost of essentials, allowed them to pay their bills and make the rent, to put food on the table and to switch the heating on. £20 a week may seem like a small amount of money to some, but to these families it makes a world of difference, and it will be crucial to help them with rising energy bills and the escalating cost of the weekly shop. They are now deeply anxious about their precarious finances and worried about how they're going to make ends meet without this uplift. The reality is we are moving potentially, Mr. Deputy Speaker, into an age of anxiety now, where anxiety is afflicting so many millions of families and households across the country. And that anxiety saps the strength from the recovery. It defeats growth. It is a brake on growth, and that is why the government's policies are so deeply damaging. It's not only the wrong thing to do in terms of living in a civilized society, it is also the definition of a false economy, because it is putting a brake on growth and holding the recovery back. Some of those who contacted me are shop workers and carers. They worked through the pandemic and they're now facing this cut. This is no way to thank them for what they've done. Members on the benches opposite stood on their doorsteps applauding our key workers and now they reward them with this cut and a cost of living crisis. Their hypocrisy is breathtaking, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I will give way.
I'm grateful to my old friend for giving way, and he talks about people applauding on the doorsteps. And when I put the question to the Prime Minister when he was talking about his tax increase, he said that the government doesn't pay care workers. Somebody else does, apparently. But does he agree with me that the government pays, grant to local authorities, and that's the money that goes to carers? And some of this extra tax money will also go to, we hope, will go to local authorities to pay care workers. So isn't it about time the government said, we are paying for the fiddler, we are going to decide the dance and should decide what the level of pay should be for care workers, and it should be much higher than it is now?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and as the Leader of the Opposition has confirmed, we are committed to having a proper living wage in this country of a minimum of £10 an hour. Members opposite are constantly asking for what Labour's plan is. Well, there is one absolutely key element of it, which is about making work pay, and it is about rewarding the heroes of the pandemic, those who kept our economy running, who kept our supply chains open, and rather than rewarding them by giving them these cuts and destroying supply chains, we should be actually seeking to build an economy that works for everyone. The grim reality is that about 40% of families claiming universal credit are in work, but that work is insecure, and it involves short hours or low pay. They're not claiming universal credit because they're workshy, they're claiming it because the government are presiding over an economy where jobs aren't paying the bills, and where low-paid people are forced to top up their income. If this cut goes ahead, it will be the biggest overnight cut to the basic rate of social security since the foundation of the modern welfare state, and it would plunge families into poverty, forcing them to rely on food banks. But it is the very definition of a false economy. It would remove £7.3 million from the Aberavon economy in my constituency alone. This money is not saved by families, but it is spent in the shops and the businesses in my constituency, helping to stimulate the local economy, helping to create jobs. Without it, spending power will decrease and the economic recovery will be stymied. Members on the benches opposite have rightly stated that we need to grow our way out of the recession. And yet they are promoting policies that will put a brake on growth. It beggars belief, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, this squeeze on living standards isn't inevitable. Poverty is a political choice. The squeeze on living standards is a political choice. The government has made the choice of hitting hard working families with a double whammy of cutting the universal credit uplift and hiking national insurance contributions. At a time when food, fuel and energy prices are going up, this will place an enormous burden on hard-working people. And it's the government's choices that have shaped an economy that has become less resilient and less secure. The government's botched Brexit and failure to plan for crises such as the pandemic have combined to expose our declining sovereign capability, our lack of supply chain resilience, and the empty short shelves in supermarkets, a shortage of HGV drivers, delays at borders and ports. All of this is combining to drive up prices, and it's hitting working families in their pockets. Two hauliers in my Aberavon constituency, Frenny and Owens, have told me about the detrimental impact the shortage of HGV drivers is having on their businesses. Owens estimates that they are 150 drivers short, and that's reducing their capacity by around 1,000 full trucks a week. They desperately need the government to take urgent action to address the shortage. And what this demonstrates is that the economy is interconnected, and the impact on supply chains, impacts on prices, impacts on the cost of living crisis, impacts on working families. The government should be doing all it can to support families through these tough times, not pulling the rug out from under them. It must start with the government cancelling this cruel and self-defeating universal credit cut. And then it must start by building an economy that works for all, by tackling insecurity at work and lifting people out of in-work poverty, by increasing the minimum wage to at least £10 an hour. And then it must start tackling the cost of living crisis by sorting out the chaotic shambles of their botched Brexit. Mr. Deputy Speaker, If the government's levelling up agenda is to be anything more than empty rhetoric, then it must change course. It must stop this race to the bottom, and it must instead strive to build an economy that works for all. It must stop its complacent, blasé approach to government and get its act together to address the huge disruption that has been caused by its botched Brexit deal. I will be quick.
I'm grateful to Warren Brown for giving way, and the Tories are very keen to talk up the importance of work, and I agree about the importance of work. And, you know, good paid jobs have got to be the answer, but they also allow many firms to go to the wall. And the latest in our area is the world-renowned Cleveland Bridge and Engineering Company. It built the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It built the Tyne Bridge. But those hundreds of jobs in the main firm and in the supply chain have gone because neither the Tory mayor in the Tees Valley nor the government were prepared to do anything to sustain those jobs, simply because they had a cash flow problem at the company. Doesn't agree with me. We need to protect today's jobs that exist, not just dream of jobs in the future.
Yeah. My honourable friend hits the nail on the head, which is much of the debate today has been about the immediate impact of universal credit cut, the immediate impact of the cost of living crisis. But we need to examine the fundamental structural weaknesses in the British economy, which has seen a massive decline in manufacturing that has been turbocharged by 11 years of Tory neglect. We need to see the fact that we've ended up concentrating so much of our economy in London and the South East around the financial services sector. The financialisation of the British economy has ended up driving inequality, ended up with a very small percentage at the top being paid eye-watering bonuses while the rest of the country is left behind. And we've also seen us shifting from being a country that makes things to a country that consumes things. Yeah. A country that is not fueled by production, but a country that is fueled by consumption. Yep. And a country that is floating on a sea of debt. All of those structural weaknesses have been chipping away at the resilience of the British economy for 11 years now. And the pandemic, combined with the botched Brexit, are now combining to expose the profound lack of resilience that we see in our economy. So whilst today's debate is extremely valuable and extremely important, it fundamentally needs to be seen in the context of 11 years of Tory failure, 11 years of neglect, 11 years of a failure to look at the foundations of our economy. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the largest steelworks in the United Kingdom in my constituency, and steel is a case in point. The honourable gentleman represents a steel constituency, is not in his place now. The act of industrial vandalism that saw the closure of the SSI works in Redcar on the watch of the Tory government. The total and utter failure to address exorbitant energy costs, which are crippling the British steel industry. The failure to stand up to China and the dumping of Chinese steel on the markets, which has deeply undermined our competitiveness across the world. The failure to have a procurement policy, a patriotic procurement policy, which actually enabled us to focus on buying British steel when those opportunities arose. If we're serious about a transition to a green economy, we will never get there without a resilient and vibrant British steel industry. And our steel industry is just one example of how this government has allowed our manufacturing sector to decline over the years that it's been in power over the last 11 years. I will give way.
Thank you, the one for giving away. But there's actually some good news this afternoon, because I understand that the government have actually helped out, and we have some form of agreement with CF Fertilisers, the company which makes fertiliser from natural gas and produces 60% of the country's CO2, which is so desperately needed for everything from beer to anaesthetic systems in hospitals. So, but one of our friends welcomed that, but also just reflect on the fact that we had to take the company had to go to the brink of failure before the government actually chose to act on energy prices and the other factors that were affecting that company.
I thank my honourable friend for the intervention, and he hits the nail on the head, which is we appear to be just in a constant state of crisis management based on the fact that there hasn't been long-term planning. The gas crisis was foreseen by many years ago, and it was about the government's failure to deliver gas security by enabling the additional storage of gas. We don't have gas stockpiled in the way that most other advanced industrialised countries have across the world. This is another example of being asleep at the wheel and not having that long-term planning in place. We have a Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy who doesn't believe in industrial strategy, who has closed down the Industrial Strategy Council at the very time where we need a partnership between the state and business to drive our economy forward. So these fundamental issues have to be addressed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've got to look at that cost of living crisis. We've got to develop a partnership between the state and business. We've got to have the long-term planning in place that we so desperately need. I would very much like to give way to the honourable gentleman again, but Mr. Deputy Speaker is looking at me in a way which tells me that perhaps the time now is to
spoke longer than Wendy.
I'll give the honourable gentleman one more intervention.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he won't know this, but I spent a lot part of my career in the gas industry, and I remember taking a group of women journalists offshore to the rough field off the Humberside in Yorkshire coast. Does he agree with me that it is extremely lamentable that the government allowed that storage facility to close down? And that wonder facility, the first of its type in the world, I'll tell him, is no longer in use for gas storage.
Well, there we have an absolutely spot-on illustration of precisely the problem that I was alluding to, which is that many of the issues that have been exposed by the pandemic are issues that are a failure of long-term planning, and it is another example of a false economy. It is about the culture of looking at the immediate bottom line, knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing, is the definition of the way in which this government has been running the country for the last 11 years. And the value of resilience is about understanding the need for investment. And it's about investing in order to save for the future. Prevention is always cheaper than cure. And that is why the upfront investment that has been so sorely lacking over the last 11 years, those chickens are now coming home to roost. With that, I think we do need to develop a new political culture, a new business culture, and a new commitment in this country to security, resilience, and partnership. And on that basis, I think the issues that we are addressing today are the symptoms of the problem and not the cause. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
So Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Hard-working people are facing a